The crowd's whispers followed Henrietta Lawson like persistent flies on a hot summer day as she strode down the main street of Redemption Creek. Her mother's old medical bag clutched in white-knuckled hands was all she had left of the woman who'd taught her everything about healing. The year was 1878, and a female doctor in the Arizona Territory was as welcome as a rattlesnake at a barn dance. But Henrietta had nowhere else to go after her mother's passing. "Look at her, thinks she's a real doctor," a woman's voice carried from the mercantile porch. "Heard her mama was just as foolish," another replied with a sharp laugh. "Girl's gonna learn her place soon enough." Henrietta kept her chin high despite the burning in her chest. She'd traveled too far and lost too much to turn back now. Up ahead stood the small abandoned cabin she'd managed to rent with her meager savings, her new home, and, with any luck, her medical practice. As she approached, she noticed a tall figure leaning against the weathered porch post. A man with broad shoulders, trail-worn clothes, and a dusty Stetson pulled low over his face. She tensed, preparing for more ridicule. "That your shingle?" he asked, nodding toward the small wooden sign tucked under her arm that read H. Lawson, physician. "Yes," she replied, voice steady despite her anxiety. "Do you have a problem with it too, Mr. Jackson Blackburn?" he replied, pushing away from the post. His face emerged from beneath the hat-brimmed strong jawline. 3 days' worth of stubble, and the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. "And no, madam, I don't have any problem with it. Been waiting for a doctor to show up in this town for 2 years. Henrietta blinked in surprise. "You're the first person who hasn't laughed at me today." A smile curved his lips as he extended a calloused hand. "Then let them laugh, Dr. Lawson. Town needs you more than they realize." The unexpectedness of his support caught her off guard, but she took his hand anyway. "And what brings you to my doorstep, Mr. Blackburn? Are you unwell?" "Just passing through," he said, releasing her hand. "But I know a thing or two about being an outsider. Thought I'd welcome you properly, unlike the rest of these folks." His eyes softened. "And it's just Jack to friends. I'm not sure I have any friends here yet," she admitted. "You do now," he replied simply. Little did Henrietta know that this chance meeting would change everything: her plans, her future, and her heart. The cowboy with the kind eyes would become more than just her first friend in Redemption Creek. He would become her fiercest ally in a town that wasn't ready for a woman like her. The cabin was barely habitable. Dust covered every surface. The roof leaked in 3 places, and something had made a nest in the stone fireplace. Henrietta set down her medical bag and surveyed what would become her home and practice. "It's a bit rough," Jack acknowledged, having followed her inside uninvited. Before she could object, he'd rolled up his sleeves. "But nothing we can't fix before nightfall." "We?" Henrietta raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Blackburn, I appreciate your kindness, but I'm perfectly capable, Jack," he corrected. "And I don't doubt your capabilities, Dr. Lawson. But 4 hands work faster than 2, and that roof won't fix itself before the afternoon rain." She wanted to refuse, to prove she needed no one's help, especially not a man's. But practicality won out. "Very well, Jack. And you may call me Henrietta, since we're being informal." Over the next several hours, Jack patched the roof, while Henrietta cleared out the debris inside. They worked mostly in silence, but it was comfortable, not strained. Occasionally, Jack would ask about her training or where she'd come from, and Henrietta found herself sharing more than she intended. "My mother was a midwife and healer," she explained as they sat on the porch steps, sharing a simple meal of bread and dried beef Jack had in his saddlebag. "She taught me everything she knew. When she fell ill, I traveled east to Philadelphia to study medicine properly, thinking I could save her." Henrietta looked down at her hands. "I returned too late." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "So you came west to start fresh. And to practice real medicine where it's needed most," she added firmly. "Not that anyone seems to want it from me." "They will," Jack said with such certainty that Henrietta almost believed him. "First time you save someone they thought was beyond saving, they'll forget you're wearing skirts instead of trousers." The sun was setting when Jack finally took his leave, promising to return the next day to help with the remaining repairs. Henrietta watched him ride away on his dappled gray stallion, wondering why a stranger would show such kindness. That night, as she lay on her bedroll in the freshly swept cabin, Henrietta heard the whispers of the townspeople echoing in her mind. "They'll never accept me," she murmured to the darkness. But alongside those doubts was the memory of Jack's confident voice. "Then let them laugh." Morning brought a pounding at her door that sent Henrietta scrambling for her robe. Outside stood a frantic-looking man, hat in hands. "My wife," he gasped. "The baby's coming wrong. Midwife says she can't help." Henrietta grabbed her medical bag without hesitation. "Take me to her." The man who introduced himself as Thomas Cooper led her to a small homestead on the outskirts of town. Inside, a young woman lay writhing on a blood-soaked bed, her face gray with exhaustion. "How long has she been laboring?" Henrietta asked, washing her hands in the basin by the bed. "Almost 2 days," replied an older woman, the midwife, with disapproval etched on her face. "Child's turned the wrong way. Nothing to be done but pray." Henrietta ignored her, focusing instead on examining the mother. "Mrs. Cooper, I'm Dr. Lawson. I'm going to help you and your baby, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" The woman nodded weakly, beyond caring who provided relief. For the next hour, Henrietta worked methodically, using techniques she'd learned in Philadelphia to turn the baby. The midwife watched skeptically at first, then with growing interest as Henrietta's skilled hands coaxed the infant into the proper position. "Now push," Henrietta instructed. "Your baby's ready to meet you." Minutes later, a healthy cry filled the room as Henrietta placed a squalling infant girl in her mother's arms. "You have a daughter, Mrs. Cooper." Thomas Cooper wept openly. "We thought we'd lose them both. How can I ever repay you, doctor?" "By telling people I'm here to help," Henrietta replied simply. "That's all I ask." As dawn broke fully over Redemption Creek, Henrietta walked wearily back to her cabin, medical bag considerably lighter after using many of her supplies. To her surprise, Jack was waiting on her porch, a bundle of wood in his arms. "Heard about the Cooper baby," he said by way of greeting. "News travels fast." Henrietta couldn't suppress her smile. "The baby and mother are both well." "First life you've saved in Redemption Creek," Jack noted, his eyes warm with something that made her heart skip. "Won't be the last." "Perhaps," she said cautiously. "But one success doesn't change years of prejudice." Jack set down the wood and stepped closer. "Maybe not, but it's a start." He gestured to the bundle. "Brought supplies for shelves. Figured a doctor needs a place for her medicines." Henrietta wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence, but exhaustion and gratitude won out. "Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it." Over the next weeks, a strange pattern emerged. Jack would appear at her cabin, always with some practical reason, bringing supplies, fixing something broken, or occasionally seeking treatment for minor injuries that Henrietta suspected weren't entirely genuine. Meanwhile, patients began to trickle in, mostly women at first, then children, and finally men too stubborn to admit they needed a lady doctor, until pain overrode pride. Not everyone changed their minds. The town's established doctor, a Dr. Wilson who spent more time at the saloon than with patients, made his disdain clear. Several prominent families refused her services outright. And the whispers continued, though less openly now that she'd proven her skills. "They're still laughing," Henrietta confessed to Jack one evening as they sat on her porch after he'd built her an examination table. "Behind my back, when they think I can't hear. They laughed at me too when I first came to town," Jack revealed, surprising her. Former outlaw trying to go straight? Nobody believed it. Henrietta turned to face him fully. "You were an outlaw?" Jack's expression turned guarded. "Not the killing kind. Ran with some cattle rustlers for a few years after the war left me with nothing. Got caught, served my time, decided to change my ways." He stared into the distance. "Been trying to prove myself ever since." "Is that why you helped me?" "Because you understand what it's like to be judged." His eyes met hers, intensity burning in their blue depths. "Partly, but mostly because from the moment I saw you walking down that street, head high despite everyone sneering, I knew you were something special." The air between them changed, charged with unspoken possibilities. Henrietta looked away first, not ready to acknowledge the warmth blooming in her chest whenever Jack was near. "I should check my supplies," she said abruptly, rising from her seat. "I'm expecting Mrs. Peterson tomorrow for her monthly tonic." Jack nodded, accepting her retreat. "I'll be heading out for a few days. Got work at the Simmons Ranch." Henrietta felt an unexpected pang at the thought of not seeing him. Be careful. Mr. Simmons came in last week with a nasty snake bite. Jack's smile returned. Why, doctor, it almost sounds like you care. I care about all my patients, she retorted, but couldn't help returning his smile. I'll remember that, he said softly before tipping his hat and walking toward his horse. Henrietta watched him go, wondering when exactly this drifting cowboy had become so important to her quiet life. And wondering, too, if he would always be just passing through. 3 days later, chaos erupted in Redemption Creek. A stagecoach overturned on the mountain road, sending passengers tumbling down the rocky slope. The injured were brought to town, overwhelming Dr. Wilson, who promptly declared 2 cases hopeless and abandoned them to tend to the wealthy banker from Phoenix. Henrietta was summoned by the mayor himself first and soon found herself working alongside a surprisingly sober Dr. Wilson to save the victims. Among the injured was a young woman with internal bleeding that Henrietta diagnosed quickly, performing an emergency procedure she'd only read about in medical journals. Dr. Wilson watched with grudging respect as she worked. Where did you learn that technique? He asked when the crisis had passed. Medical College of Pennsylvania, she answered, not looking up from bandaging a fractured arm. Humph. Wouldn't have thought they'd teach something so practical to women, he muttered. Henrietta bit back a sharp retort. We learned the same medicine as the men, Dr. Wilson. The body doesn't care who's treating it, only that the treatment is correct. To her surprise, the older doctor nodded slowly. You saved lives today that I couldn't. Perhaps I've been hasty in my judgment. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. For Henrietta, that was enough of a victory. As night fell, Henrietta finally trudged home, every muscle aching from hours of intense work. She was startled to find Jack sitting on her porch steps, his face tight with worry. You're hurt, she said immediately, noticing the blood-soaked bandage on his arm. It's nothing, he insisted. Got caught on some barbed wire at the ranch. Heard about the accident and came to help, but looks like you managed without me. Henrietta rolled her eyes and unlocked her door. Inside, that needs proper cleaning. As she treated his wound a deep gash that indeed needed attention, Jack watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She finally asked, securing the fresh bandage. You look exhausted, but content, he observed. Like you found your purpose. Henrietta considered this. I have. Despite everything, this is where I'm meant to be. She finished her work and met his gaze. Even if not everyone believes in me yet. They're starting to, Jack said. Heard people talking at the general store. The banker's wife is telling everyone how you saved that girl when Wilson gave up. One crisis doesn't change everything. No, Jack agreed, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the gesture so intimate it made her breath catch. But it's a beginning, and you have more friends here than you think. His hand lingered near her face, and for a moment, Henrietta thought he might lean in closer. Instead, he pulled back, standing abruptly. It's late. You need rest. Disappointment flooded her, though she couldn't explain why. Yes, of course. Thank you for checking on me. At the door, Jack paused. Henrietta? Yes. I'm proud of you, he said simply, then disappeared into the night. Those 4 words stayed with her as she prepared for bed, warming her more than they should have. Proud of her. When was the last time anyone had said that? Her mother, perhaps, but that had been years ago. As summer turned to fall, Henrietta's practice flourished. The successful treatment of the stagecoach victims had indeed shifted public opinion. Not everyone accepted her, some still crossed the street to avoid her, but enough people sought her services that she no longer worried about making ends meet. Jack remained a constant, if sometimes elusive, presence. He took odd jobs around the territory, sometimes disappearing for weeks, but always returning to Redemption Creek. To her cabin. To her. Neither acknowledged the growing connection between them. Henrietta told herself it was friendship born of mutual respect, nothing more. She'd seen too many talented women abandon their calling for marriage, and she wouldn't be one of them. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when she spotted his gray stallion approaching, or the way time seemed to slow when their hands accidentally touched. You're being foolish, she scolded her reflection one morning after catching herself smiling at the memory of Jack's laughter. He's a drifter. He'll move on eventually. But a small voice whispered that he hadn't yet. despite having every opportunity to do so. That afternoon, Henrietta treated a young girl for a broken wrist. As she worked, the child's mother, Mrs. Sullivan, made conversation. "That Mr. Blackburn sure spends a lot of time around your place, Dr. Lawson," she remarked with a knowing smile. Henrietta kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Blackburn has been kind enough to help with repairs. I'm not particularly skilled with a hammer." Mrs. Sullivan hummed skeptically. "Well, he turned down good money to work at the Harper Ranch. Said he had commitments in town. Only commitment I've seen is to your front porch." The implication was clear, and Henrietta felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Sullivan, I assure you, Mr. Blackburn and I are merely friends." "If you say so," the woman replied, clearly unconvinced. "But a woman alone in these parts. Folks talk. Might be better to make it official, if you understand my meaning." Henrietta stiffened. "I understand perfectly, but I didn't come west to find a husband, Mrs. Sullivan. I came to practice medicine." "Can't see why you couldn't do both," the woman countered, "especially with a man who looks at you the way he does." The conversation left Henrietta unsettled. Were people assuming impropriety? Was Jack's reputation suffering because of his association with her? Worse, was she developing feelings that would eventually compromise her professional standing? That evening when Jack arrived with a rabbit for supper, a common occurrence, now Henrietta was uncharacteristically distant. "Something troubling you, Doc?" he asked as they ate at her small table. She considered deflecting, but opted for honesty. "People are talking about us, Jack." He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "Folks always talk. That's never bothered you before." "They're implying impropriety," she said carefully. "Given my position, I can't afford such rumors." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something like hurt. "You want me to stop coming around?" "No." The word escaped before she could temper it. "More controlled," she added. "I simply think we should be more circumspect." Jack set down his fork. "Henrietta, I've never cared what people think of me, but I would never do anything to damage your reputation." His jaw tightened. "If my presence is causing problems, it isn't," she interrupted. "But perhaps we should be more mindful of appearances." He studied her face. "Is that all that's bothering you? Or is it something else?" The real question hung unspoken between them. Was she afraid of the rumors, or of the feelings behind them? "I can't afford distractions," she finally said. "My work must come first." Jack nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I understand." He stood, leaving his meal half finished. "I'll be riding out to the Wilson Ranch tomorrow. Probably be gone a couple weeks." "Jack, it's all right, Henrietta," he said, his voice gentle despite the hurt in his eyes. "I respect your dedication. Always have." After he left, Henrietta sat alone at the table, feeling hollow despite doing what she thought was right. Protecting her practice, her reputation, her independence. So why did it feel like she'd just made a terrible mistake? The next morning, Jack departed without saying goodbye. Henrietta told herself it was better this way, cleaner. She threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, taking on additional patients, and even beginning to write a treatise on frontier medicine. 2 weeks stretched into 3 with no sign of Jack. Henrietta convinced herself she was relieved, even as she caught herself watching the road whenever a rider approached. Then came the night that changed everything. A violent storm swept through Redemption Creek, bringing howling winds and torrential rain. Henrietta was awakened by frantic pounding on her door. Outside stood Sheriff Taylor, soaked to the skin. "The creek's flooding," he shouted over the storm. "South end of town's already underwater. We're evacuating everyone to the church on high ground." Henrietta grabbed her medical bag and a few essentials. "Any injuries?" "None yet, but with this weather." The sheriff didn't need to finish. The church was chaotic, families huddled together, children crying, elderly folks struggling with the cold and damp. Henrietta moved among them, treating minor injuries and trying to keep spirits up as the storm raged outside. Near dawn, the doors burst open, and staggered 2 drenched figures supporting a third between them. Henrietta rushed forward, recognizing the Peterson brothers and Jack. "Found him trying to save our livestock," Ben Peterson explained as they lowered Jack to a pew. "Barn collapsed. Beam caught him in the side." Jack was conscious but pale, his breathing labored. Henrietta's professional demeanor nearly cracked at the sight of him, but she forced herself to focus. "I need space and light," she commanded, and people quickly cleared the area. To Jack, she said softly, I need to examine you. This might hurt. His eyes found hers, bright with pain but also with something like relief. Trust you, Doc, he managed. Careful examination revealed 3 broken ribs and a deep laceration along his side. Henrietta worked methodically, cleaning the wound and binding his ribs tight enough to support but not restrict breathing. You're lucky, she told him when she'd finished. The cut missed anything vital, and ribs will heal. But you'll need rest. Lots of it. Jack attempted a smile that turned into a grimace. Not very good at resting. You'll learn, she replied firmly. When the worst of his pain had eased with laudanum, Henrietta sat beside him while the rest of the church dozed fitfully, waiting out the storm. Wasn't planning to see you like this, Jack murmured, his voice rough. Wanted to come back proper. With flowers maybe. Henrietta felt her throat tighten. Jack, no, let me finish, he insisted. Been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks. About what I want. Where I belong. His hand found hers in the dim light. I know you've got your reasons for keeping your distance. And I respect that. But I need you to know something. He paused, gathering strength. I'm not passing through anymore, Henrietta. I bought land. The old McKinnon place west of town. Going to raise horses. Surprise rendered her momentarily speechless. You're staying. For good, he confirmed. And not just because of you, though you're a big part of it. Found something here I never had before. Purpose. Community. His fingers tightened around hers. But mostly, I found you. And even if all we ever are is friends, that's enough reason to put down roots. The honesty in his voice undid her careful defenses. I was wrong to push you away, she admitted quietly. I've spent so long fighting to be taken seriously that I forgot it's possible to have both my practice and personal happiness. Jack's eyes, though clouded with pain, brightened. Are you saying I make you happy, Dr. Lawson? Despite everything, the storm, his injuries, the watching eyes of townsfolk pretending to sleep, Henrietta smiled. When you're not being infuriatingly stubborn, yes. Morning brought clearing skies and the realization that while the flooding had damaged many buildings, no lives had been lost. Redemption Creek began the process of rebuilding, a process that would take weeks. Jack, unable to return to his newly purchased property until his ribs healed, reluctantly accepted Henrietta's offer to recover in her spare room. The arrangement raised eyebrows, but with Mrs. Peterson volunteering as chaperone during the day, even the most gossipy tongues eventually quieted. As Jack healed, Henrietta found herself enjoying his constant presence in ways she hadn't anticipated. Their conversations ranged from serious discussions about medicine and Jack's plans for his horse ranch to lighthearted debates about the best way to cook beans. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Jack broached a subject they'd been circling for days. There's a social at the church next Saturday, he said casually. First one since the flood. Thought maybe you'd like to go. Henrietta glanced at him. Together? Publicly. That was my thinking. He met her eyes steadily. Unless you're still worried about appearances. She considered this. The flood had changed things in Redemption Creek. Working alongside everyone during the crisis, Henrietta had cemented her place in the community. Even Dr. Wilson had grudgingly acknowledged her skills when they'd partnered to treat the injured. I'd like that, she decided. Though you should know, dancing might aggravate those ribs. Jack grinned. Some things are worth the pain. The social marked a turning point. Walking into the church on Jack's arm, Henrietta felt the stares but also the nods of acceptance. When Reverend Clark welcomed Dr. Lawson and Mr. Blackburn, without hesitation, something tight inside her chest finally relaxed. They danced just once, a slow waltz that Jack insisted he could manage. As they moved carefully around the floor, Henrietta became aware of whispers following them. It's starting again, she murmured to Jack. The talk. Let me guess, he replied, his hand warm at her waist. They're laughing at the lady doctor who swore she didn't need a man, now dancing with the reformed outlaw. Henrietta nodded, her eyes downcast. I can hear them. So much for her independence, they're saying. Jack's fingers gently tilted her chin up until their eyes met. Then let them laugh, he said with quiet intensity. Let them choke on our joy. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her breath catch. Our joy. Yes, ours, he affirmed. Because I am joyful when I'm with you, Henrietta Lawson. and I hope you feel the same." In that moment, surrounded by the very people who had once mocked her dreams, Henrietta made a decision. She stopped dancing, took Jack's face between her hands, and kissed him, a public declaration that sent fresh whispers rippling through the crowd. When she pulled back, Jack looked stunned but delighted. "Well, doctor," he said with a slow smile, "if that's your prescription, I believe I'm already feeling better." Henrietta laughed, a free sound she hadn't known herself capable of making. "Good, because I intend to prescribe it regularly." Summer faded into fall, and Jack's recovery progressed enough for him to begin work on his ranch. The McKinnon property required substantial renovation, but Jack attacked the challenge with characteristic determination. Henrietta found herself spending her free afternoons there, helping where she could and simply enjoying watching Jack build his dream. "It's not much yet," he apologized one day as they surveyed the half-repaired barn. "But by spring, I'll have the first horses." "It's wonderful," Henrietta assured him, genuinely impressed by how much he'd accomplished. "Though I worry about you doing too much alone." Jack hesitated before responding. "Been thinking about that. This place. It's too big for just one person." He turned to face her fully. "I'd like you to consider something, but I want you to take your time answering." Henrietta felt her pulse quicken. "What is it?" "I'm not asking you to give up your practice. That's part of who you are, and I'd never want to change that." He took her hands in his. "But maybe we could build something together. A life that includes both our dreams." Understanding dawned. "Jack Blackburn, are you proposing?" "Not very well, apparently," he said with a nervous laugh. "But yes, I love you, Henrietta. Have since that first day when you stood on your porch and told me you didn't need my help. Then let me give it anyway." Tears blurred her vision. "People will talk. People already talk. But I've noticed something, they're starting to talk differently. With respect." He squeezed her hands. "The lady doctor and the horse rancher. Partners in every sense." Henrietta considered what marriage to Jack would mean. Not the end of her practice, as she'd once feared, but support for it. Not submission, but partnership. Not limitation, but expansion. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their wedding that December was small, but well-attended. Dr. Wilson gave Henrietta away, a gesture that symbolized more than just tradition. It represented the town's acceptance of her as both a physician and a woman. As they exchanged vows in the same church where they'd danced months earlier, Henrietta caught snippets of conversation from the pews. "Never thought she'd settle down. He was wild once, you know. Strange match, those two." But the whispers lacked the malice of before. There was curiosity, perhaps even admiration in those murmured observations. At the reception, Mrs. Sullivan approached with a knowing smile. "Seems you found a way to have both after all, Dr. Lawson, or should I say Mrs. Blackburn now?" "Still Dr. Lawson professionally," Henrietta corrected gently. "Though I don't mind Mrs. Blackburn for social occasions." "Well, whatever you call yourself, you've proven a lot of people wrong." The woman patted her hand. "Including me. Didn't think a woman doctor could last out here, but you've more than proven your worth." Later, as they danced beneath paper lanterns in the town hall, Jack pulled Henrietta close. "Happy, Mrs. Blackburn, Dr. Lawson, love of my life." She laughed, resting her head against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought possible." She looked up at him. "Do you remember what you said at that first social? About letting them choke on our joy?" Jack nodded. "Still stand by it." "Well, there's no more choking necessary," Henrietta observed. "They've all swallowed their pride and accepted us." "Most have," Jack agreed, spinning her gently. "But I'd face them all again if it meant ending up right here, with you." Spring brought new beginnings, the first foals at Blackburn Ranch, an expansion of Henrietta's practice to include a small infirmary, and the news they'd been hoping for since their wedding night. "You're sure?" Jack asked, his voice hushed with wonder when Henrietta shared her suspicion. "I'm a doctor, Jack," she reminded him with a smile. "I'm quite certain. Come December, we'll be 3 instead of 2. His response was to lift her into his arms, spinning her around their kitchen until they were both laughing breathlessly. "A baby," he kept saying. "Our baby." The pregnancy didn't slow Henrietta's practice, though she did allow Jack to drive her to distant house calls as her condition became more apparent. Redemption Creek watched with interest as their doctor continued working while preparing for motherhood. "You're changing minds," Jack told her one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, a new construction halfway between her practice in town and his ranch. Showing them a woman can be both a mother and a professional. Henrietta rested her hands on her growing belly. I hope so. I want our child to grow up in a world with fewer limitations. With you as a mother, how could they be limited? Jack placed his hand over hers. Boy or girl, this child will know they can become anything with enough determination. December brought a snowstorm and, in its midst, the birth of James Henry Blackburn, named for both his father and mother. The labor was difficult but manageable with Dr. Wilson's assistance and Jack's unwavering support. He's perfect, Jack whispered, cradling his son with awe. Henrietta, he's absolutely perfect. Exhausted but elated, Henrietta watched the man she loved holding their child. He is, she agreed. And so is this. All of it. News of young James's arrival spread quickly. The following days brought a parade of visitors bearing gifts and congratulations, including many who had once scoffed at the very idea of a female physician. Quite the turnaround, Dr. Wilson remarked during one such visit. Remember when half the town wouldn't speak to you? Now they're bringing casseroles. Henrietta smiled, watching Mrs. Peterson coo over the baby while Jack hovered proudly nearby. People change when given reason to. You gave them reason, the older doctor acknowledged. Your skill, your persistence, and that stubborn cowboy of yours who wouldn't let anyone say a word against you. We gave each other courage, Henrietta corrected softly, to be who we truly are, regardless of what others thought. As winter yielded to spring once more, Henrietta resumed her practice with baby James often accompanying her. Patients grew accustomed to seeing the doctor with an infant sling across her chest or Jack appearing to collect the baby when his cries became too disruptive. Redemption Creek expanded, drawing new settlers attracted by stories of the thriving community with excellent medical care. Blackburn Ranch prospered, Jack's horses becoming known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. 5 years after their wedding, Henrietta sat at her desk completing patient notes when Jack entered with 7-year-old James and their 3-year-old daughter, Hannah. Thought we'd surprise you for lunch, Jack announced, setting a basket on her desk. The children have news. James bounced forward eagerly. Tommy Wilson said I couldn't be a doctor and a horse trainer when I grow up. Said I had to pick one. The boy's expression turned triumphant. But I told him my mama delivers babies and helps Papa with the horses, so I can do both too. Henrietta exchanged a look with Jack, who was barely suppressing his pride. And what did Tommy say to that? He laughed, James admitted. But then Hannah told him, I said he could choke on our joy. Little Hannah declared proudly, clearly repeating a phrase she'd heard without fully understanding it. Jack burst into laughter while Henrietta tried to maintain a serious expression. Hannah, sweetheart, that's not quite, actually. Jack interrupted, lifting Hannah into his arms. That's exactly right, little one. Exactly right. Later that evening, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Henrietta and Jack sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge above Redemption Creek. Did you ever imagine this? Henrietta asked, leaning against his shoulder. That day when you first saw me walking down the street with my medical bag. Jack's arm tightened around her. Not in my wildest dreams. I was just hoping you might patch up my arm someday. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Though I always knew you were extraordinary. We both were, she corrected. The outlaw and the lady doctor. What a pair we made. Make, he corrected. Present tense. Our stories still being written. Henrietta smiled, thinking of their children sleeping peacefully inside, of her thriving practice, of Jack's successful ranch. Of the life they'd built together despite every obstacle. They don't laugh anymore, she observed. Not at me, not at us. No, Jack agreed. Now they point to us as an example. Of determination. Of possibility. He turned to face her, his eyes as warm and blue as the day they'd met. Of love that defies expectation. Then I suppose they've choked enough on our joy, Henrietta said with a smile, leaning forward to kiss the man who had believed in her from the beginning. Plenty more joy to come, Jack promised against her lips. Enough to silence every doubt, every whisper, every laugh. And in the years that followed, that promise held true. Henrietta Lawson and Jack Blackburn built their legacy in Redemption Creek, she as the physician who trained a generation of frontier doctors, including her son, and he is the rancher whose bloodlines improved horses throughout the West. Together, they prove that joy shared is joy multiplied, and that the truest victory isn't silencing one's critics, but living so fully that their words become irrelevant nothing but fading echoes against the solid reality of a life well lived and a love that dared to exist where it shouldn't have been possible. And sometimes, when newcomers express surprise at the formidable partnership of the doctor and the rancher, their grandchildren would share the family motto with mischievous grins: "Let them laugh. Let them choke on our joy."